So good morning and welcome everybody to this event of the International Federation of Public History. My name is Jimena Perry. I am the project manager for Explorers. Explorers, we do these events once a month, and today we are very happy to have with us two very interesting and special guests. Today, Anna Amadek will be talking about a presentation she has called The More It Changed, a look back at a career of a female public historian over the last couple of decades. Anna is a former curator of natural resources and currently the director of the curatorial division at Ingenium, Canada's Museum of Science and Innovation. She is also an instructor in the public history program at Carleton University in Ottawa, Ontario, and she has been a public historian for over 2 decades. Today, there's also with us Emily Gann. Her talk is called What Does a Feminist Collection Look Like? Emily is a curator of natural resources and industrial technologies at Ingenium. She's interested in representations and explorations of gender in the collection and is completing her PhD at the University of Ottawa in the Institute of Feminist and Gender Studies. So welcome very much, Anna and Emily. Thank you also for accepting our invitation, and the floor is all yours.
Thank you. Emily, do you want me to start?
That's great. Thanks.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. It's 10 a.m. in Ottawa, Ontario right now. I would like to acknowledge that I speak from the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabeg people. The Algonquin people have lived on this land since the time immemorial, and I am very grateful to have the opportunity to live here. I would also like to thank Jimena for organizing this session. It's quite an interesting thought to look back at the work of female public historians. Jimena asked us to talk about public history made by women. But when I started to think about my projects over the last 3 decades, I have been working in the public history environment for 3 decades as a public historian for about 20 years. I realized that I really have to talk about the experience of doing public history as a woman first, before I could talk about my project. So I will speak about personal experiences, but I think that some of you may recognize them as quite universal to our generation of public historians, female public historians. I also started to think about the context, 20, 30 years ago when I was starting my career and now. And I realized that perhaps we are not leaving the public history workplace in as good of a state right now as we would wish to leave it for the next generation of public historians. Hence the title of my talk. The more it changes, the more it actually stays the same. We are dealing with very similar issues that we dealt with 30 years ago. That gender-related hostility still exists. It may be more subtle, but it's here. It sometimes masquerades as ageism, or sometimes it may masquerade as a professional advice. Right now, it's often directed at non-binary people, historians, rather than female staff. But the hostility is here as much as it was 30 years ago. So the question is, why is it that the professional context for a female public historian remains so difficult and is so resistant to change? I think that we need to look at 3 different aspects of our work. The context external to the workplace. So our partners, collaborators, clients, funders, those who donate artifacts to the national collection in case of museums. Then there is the organizational structure within our institution and the gender makeup of our workplace. And then finally, the projects that we do, that we are able to do, or sometimes we are not able to do. Gender, of course, is also intertwined with other issues. within my own career, I could never separate it from the fact that I am an immigrant public historian. So I am a female immigrant public historian. Sometimes that caused problems. Sometimes it was actually to my advantage. So, for example, when we started to talk about creating the International Federation for Public History, there was some anxiety around American historians leading the international organization or leading the conversation. And it actually was an advantage for me to be Polish Canadian, and it was easier for me to bring the group together. Or, that's my favorite example from my career, building relationships with indigenous communities may be very complex for a Canadian historian, especially a Canadian historian working for what is perceived as a federal institution, government institution, such as National Museum. So we were trying to arrange interviews with a very important chief of a First Nation in Canada. He was reluctant to talk to us until he learned that I was Polish, so not as much of an antagonist. He called me a Polak and then gave me a great interview. So there is that aspect, female immigrant public historian. I found that the professional context around my work also changed or was related to my age. So when I was a young woman, I was often dismissed. When I was a mid-career historian, I was always questioned. And now I actually find I don't explain myself anymore to anyone. Which leads me to those three different aspects of us working as female public historians. So the external context. I was a female immigrant historian working within the natural resources, so energy, mining, metallurgy sectors, not only male dominated, but almost entirely staffed by men. So even though I was a historian and a museum curator, I had to be as tough as any woman who chose a career in natural resources. My knowledge was constantly tested, and it was without question due to my gender. I had a male assistant in one of the projects, and he was never questioned in the same way. It almost became a joke among us that I would tell him, okay, you take this on. Today, it's just going to be quicker. As I mentioned, this attitude evolved with my age. So when I was young, many men in the industry would not talk to me at all. Where are the guys? That was the question. I would enter the room. Immediately I would hear, where are the guys? No, it's just me. Then they would dismiss me in a more passive-aggressive way. So the sentence that I heard the most often was, Anna, I don't know how much you think you know about this topic, but let me tell you. So it wasn't even, Anna, I don't know how much you know, how much you think you know about this topic. And then finally, they came to respect my knowledge and trust me with their stories. But it took years. So this public historian journey for me is actually very representative of a typical journey of a woman in the natural resources industry. And it gave me a great understanding of what my female research partners dealt with. The internal museum context has also been interesting. For many years, curators at our museums, we operate Science and Technology Museum, Aviation and Space, and Agriculture and Food Museums. So the curators were male. Assistant curators were female. I'm the first female director of a curatorial division in over 50 years history of this institution. The exhibitions programming were very much focused on male stories, male inventors, users of technologies, male pilots, male farmers. Even an exhibition on domestic technology was curated by a male historian. There were 2 female curators before me at our museums, Dr. Mary Gray, who was responsible for astronomy, and Louise Trottier, curator of energy and industrial technologies. They did not explore any subjects related to the history of women scientists. They did not use any gender-informed technologies or curated exhibitions related to women's role in science and technology. They did stand up against workplace harassment. They did protect us from harassment. But their message to us was very clear. Us, meaning the next generation of public historians and curators coming into the institution. The message was we had to be tough, we had to play the game, we had to curate in the same manner that our male colleagues to succeed. Any project that would place women perspective in the center would not be successful and perhaps did not belong in a science and technology museum. And I fully understand why they were passing on this message to us. This was their reality. So that message brings me to the last point. Projects that we were and were not able to do throughout our career. When I say our, I mean my generation of public historians and female museum curators. So throughout about half of my career, I worked in an environment in which any project related to female history would fail by design. Sometimes we try to bring an exhibition proposal that would appeal to women or would talk about women. We wouldn't get funding for that type of exhibition. So when I became a curator, I made a very conscious decision to change this for my subject area. I could not change it for the entire institution, for the entire division, but I certainly could change it for my subject area. So I started by gathering data that could not be dismissed. Our National Natural Resources Artifact Collection did not contain even one artifact that would speak to the professional career of women. Fact that cannot be dismissed. Moreover, women only donated to the artifact collection in general, not just natural resources, but the national collection in general, artifacts that spoke about lives of their fathers and husbands. And sometimes they would donate artifacts that spoke to the housework done by their mothers. Nobody was preserving scientific and technological contribution of women. The next step for me was to ask why. Why women are not preserving material culture of their work, of their professional lives, why they don't want to donate that evidence to the national collection. So I did some eye-opening surveys and research with female donors, with female audiences to our museums. And that allowed us to understand the differences in the attitudes of men and women toward artifact collections. Based on this information, my entire approach to curation changed. So, for example, the donor interview strategies. When a man wanted to donate something to the museum, when he contacted us, I would always ask about their wives, their mothers, what did they do? If there was a woman present during that conversation with a maybe male inventor or someone who contributed to science and tech in Canada, I would always talk to the woman. And I found that quite often the wives, women in the life of those male inventors were very much involved in the work. Sometimes they work for exactly the same institutions as their husbands. If I was visiting a mine, I would seek female miners. I would talk to them first to make sure that they knew I was doing research, that they knew I was interested in what in their professional lives. And that allowed me to build a bit more of a network. Through some targeted acquisitions, we actually increased the representation of women's professional careers in the collection, natural resources collection, to between 12 and 25% of the artifacts, depending on the sector. That's a small number, but it is a representative number for the workforce. I also made sure that the research projects included women. that when we were planning exhibitions, the first stories that I would tell to the exhibition team would be the stories of women, to make sure that they actually end up on the museum floor. I found that the approach to engage men and women in my research projects had to be very different. Women always asked why. Why do you want to tell my story? Why do you want my stuff? What is the value in preserving the artifacts? They were not interested in how I'm going to tell the story or who am I telling the story to. They always ask the why questions. Also, the more of a general type of appeal for participation in projects. So crowdsourcing, or a phone call to company when I say, I'm working on this research project. Do you have someone who would like to join me? Can I talk to your staff? There is always a quick response from men. That did not attract women. I had to do my research first, find specific individuals, identify the individuals, and then appeal to those individuals. They would take their time to make a decision. They would ask me lots of questions about the project, again, those why questions. So when I planned the projects when I wanted to attract women, I had to make sure that my timelines were right, that I was leaving lots of space for those conversations. But the results were certainly worth. So the point that I want to make through telling you about my professional journey is that having to work through difficulties and issues, having to push forward, having to assert ourselves, prove the point all the time, it has taken away from the energy that we could have invested in the projects that we thought were important. Working through the system, conducting projects despite institutional obstacles and not because of institutional goals, was a loss of productivity. It has taken the precious time from actually making a change. The workplace has evolved. We are in a much, much better situation right now. We have a wonderful female CEO who supports us, wonderful female VP who supports us. Our workforce right now in the curatorial division is balanced. We have half of male curators, half female staff within the division. We are trying to bring in more non-binary and LGBTQ+ perspectives into curation. But that evolution still faces some systematic barriers. And ultimately, I wish that my generation of public historians left the workplace in a much better shape for our younger colleagues. And on that note, I will pass it on to Emily. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna, very much. It was very interesting, and I also have a lot of questions. So before I give the floor to Emily, I want to tell the audience that if you have any comments or questions after Emily's presentation, we will open up the floor, or if you have any comments, you can also use the chat. So thank you very much, Emily. The floor is all yours.
Great, thank you. Before I begin, I'll just note that Anna has also served as a phenomenal mentor to so many young up-and-coming public historians. And so maybe that's something we can talk about as well, as this role, these added responsibilities that many of us do take on in order to chip away at those institutionalized and systemic issues and make space for voices that we think are important in our workforce. So I'd like to begin, as Anna did, by taking a moment to acknowledge the Algonquin Nation, whose traditional and unceded territory I'm presenting to you from today. I think that these acknowledgements are incredibly important, but expressly significant in light of the stories of loss that continue to emerge from the history of residential schools. The title of my talk today, What Does a Feminist Collection Look Like?, is rather tongue-in-cheek, as I don't mean to suggest that there is such a thing as a definitive and complete feminist collection. Rather, what I will suggest to you today is that there are approaches, methodologies, considerations, and interpretations that can inform collecting based on the ideals of feminism, what some might call feminist collecting or feminist curating. These can be applied to existing collections, or shape the focus of future acquisitions. They can inform collaboration and research questions, and hopefully challenge longstanding views and narratives shared about artifacts individually and collections more broadly. Before I really begin my presentation, I'll note that while much of what I share can be applied across collecting areas, my insight is informed from my work with technology collections, and so the examples shared today will focus or will be pulled from these fields of study and materiality. So what is feminism, and why should we consider it in relationship with collecting? Since its first use in the 1800s to describe the qualities of females, feminism has held many definitions, informed a wide range and variety of movements and activisms and waves. It has been inclusive and exclusive and critiqued as a tool of privilege. It has morphed from being focused on the rights of women to the equality of the sexes to the equity of all genders. Unfortunately, feminism is increasingly intersectional, recognizing that categories of oppression intersect and inform one another in expected and unexpected ways that shape identity and experience. The fourth wave of feminism, which we are in right now, is characterized as queer, sex positive, trans inclusive, body positive, and digitally driven, seeking to further deconstruct gender norms and challenge existing systems for and with equity-seeking groups. Bringing this back to collections, I believe that by incorporating questions of equity, representation, and experience, particularly as they pertain to gender, through collecting, research, and collaborations, feminism can, in fact, inform collection development. So how can we apply feminism to existing collections? The most simple and straightforward answer is through the questions we ask of artifacts and collections. With a technology collection, feminist technology studies has taught us that gender and technology are mutually constitutive, that they are neither fixed nor formed, but rather fluid and mutually shaping. This means that gender or gender stereotypes or norms can inform how a technology is designed, how it works, how it sounds, how it smells, etc. And technology, or the use of a technology, can reaffirm or challenge socioculturally held roles and notions about gender identity, gender norms, and gender stereotypes. A clear example of this approach can be seen in the gender scripting of 1920s children's toys. If you think about domestic children's toys, so things like little stoves, blenders, toasters, from about the 1920s to the 1960s, what gender representation, color, and gendered assumptions are designed into these pieces? Ingenium has artifacts such as these in the collection, and they are all reds and pinks and pastels, and include imagery of girls and mother on them completing housework. And a few have texts that read, Little Miss Housekeeper. A feminist collection question could be, how are these toys gendered and for what purpose? The short answer would be that these toys were designed to prepare girls for their futures as housewives and keepers of their homes. The larger answer to this question would tap into the history of housework, women's role in and out of the home, the patriarchy of capitalism, the patriarchy of consumerism, and so on. By simply bringing a gender lens to questions, collections can offer untold stories and histories that connect to feminist practice. The next method of engaging feminist principles in collection development is through research and collaboration. Catherine Ott, a curator in the Division of Science and Medicine at the National Museum of American History, has said that the role of curator has shifted from expert and great authority to host and safeguard. It is a rethinking of curatorial work that is part of a larger discussion about authority and knowledge and the deconstruction of meta-narratives in favor of nuanced insight and lived experience. Working with individuals, groups, and communities and respecting their understanding of artifacts, histories, events, and meanings is central to feminist collecting. Pursuing the lines of inquiry that these folks identify as being significant and important, equally so. I suggest to you that collaboration, surrendering authority, and not only partnering with key groups on projects, but encouraging those individuals or communities to determine the focus and course of research is yet another way of using feminist thinking to intervene in existing collections. Another area of consideration is the methodologies we choose to use when working with collections. Leaving secondary sources aside for this conversation, oral histories or autobiographies are powerful feminist tools. While scholars like Joan Scott have looked at the complicated relationship and power dynamics between interviewee and interviewer, increasingly fields like critical disability studies and feminist studies have adopted these methods as a means for engaging with the past or recent past in a way that privileges and prioritizes the unique individual and intersectional experience. Oral histories do have their limitations, of course. They are not comprehensive and can be factually flawed through the process of misremembering, but I would argue this does not make them any less valuable or valid. Quite the opposite, as points of disconnect can, once again, challenge and inform how we come to know and understand the artifacts in the collection. I wouldn't say it's a rule of feminist collecting, but moving from quantitative to qualitative inquiry can illuminate underrepresented experiences and offer more inclusive frameworks for engaging with understandings of the past. And while cumbersome, I also think that the ethics legwork required to conduct interviews is an important part of this work. Setting boundaries, understanding accountability, and providing informed and sustained consent are incredibly meaningful feminist values in and outside of research. I was speaking with a student the other day who was completing a research report on women in competitive cycling in Canada, and she is using oral histories as her primary methodology. She found that consent and anonymity were a means to self-expression for women whose high visibility and status in sport can make it difficult to speak one's truth to patriarchy and power, which was really telling. So far, I've shared a few ways in which feminist principles can reshape our view and understanding of existing collections. I'd now like to highlight a few ways that feminism can inform how we build our collections, primarily through acquisitions and collecting of artifacts. As a start, acquisitions can be used to fill gaps in collections where underrepresentation or a lack of representation of women and gendered experience is present. In technology collections, there are notable gaps in artifacts that connect to fertility and motherhood, but I would challenge colleagues to explore beyond this traditional and binary understanding of the female experience. Anna did this work when she looked at how women miners were adapting their clothing to work in this industry. Mining, a field that has been historically dominated by men, as Anna has shared, has, as a result, systems and networks in place to support how they work and perform in these spaces. Clothing is a prime example. Jumpsuits are designed with longer inseams, wider spaces for appendages, and openings that allow for the user to remain fully clothed and standing while going to the bathroom. Similarly, footwear is primarily designed for wider, longer feet with higher, thicker ankles. Anna found that some female miners were purchasing women-made and female-focused mining wear that was designed for different bodies. These included jumpsuits designed for compact frames and steel toes intended for relatively more narrow feet. These artifacts of clothing are now on display at the Canada Science and Technology Museum and serve as a visible and physical representation of the experience of women in mining. Acquiring specific artifacts for a collection is one way of increasing the stories, representations, and safeguarding the material culture of women, as well as other equity-seeking groups. This is an approach that can and has been used in many collections, and while effective in targeting specific pieces in history, can sometimes create gender silos, where there seem to be pockets of gender or gendered histories within a larger collection. In order to avoid this, a broader approach that seeks to include questions about experience, gender, and equity within long-held standards could be adopted. I think here about Ingenium's own acquisition proposal form and database, which has categories for function, Canadian significance, and technical significance. These categories seek to answer the question, why is this piece important? Which has been the traditional approach of many technology museums, as there has been pressure to use the collection to show innovation and progress over time. For many years, we have finagled important and diverse stories into these categories and subverted this larger question of why is this piece important to for whom is this piece important and who does this artifact connect to, why and in what way. That said, it would be powerful to see these categories reframed or another category added that specifically addresses gender or equity. This would also do away with the gender silos I mentioned just earlier, as it would promote a concerted and collective effort to explore and document gendered experiences and insight. This is something that I feel is important in this work, as it is often women or queer folks taking on this labor. I have had male colleagues actually tell me that they don't do gender history. Ideally, feminist collecting is a collective effort. For me personally, I see and understand feminist curating and collecting as a form of activism. If the personal is truly political, then the work we do is a statement to the values we hold and the shared value we attribute to collections, material culture, and the challenging histories of the past. In thinking about my work in this way, I feel part of larger movements that promote equity and gender inclusivity outside of the museum. Marches and calls for action and change, for example, are commanding testament to the public to listen to the voices of women. In my own way, I frame my own practice as supporting these larger feminist acts and activism as I seek to learn, explore, and share the histories and knowledge and experiences of women, like I've shared with you today. I can also recognize that this work will never be complete. There will always be insights and understandings that can contribute nuances and complicate understandings of artifacts and histories in our collection. While this can sometimes feel daunting, I fully embrace the adage of you know what you know and you don't know what you don't know. Using the approaches and methods I've shared with you today, I feel equipped to engage with these uncertainties and continue learning. I also want to reflect on the fact that just as feminist work in the present has critiqued feminist work of the past, I know that this form of feminist curating and collecting will very well be deconstructed and dismissed in favor of new tools, theories, methods, and work in the future. I welcome this conversation. The more we do and try and potentially fail, the more we can grow this body of work and materiality. This comes back to my opening comment that there is no definitive feminist collection. I believe that just like our understandings of gender as fluid and flux, collection work is also a continual process, for lack of a better word, that responds to events, understandings in unexpected and exploratory and respectful ways. I'd like to thank Dr. Perry for inviting us here to talk today. While these thoughts have informed my work, I've never put them to paper, and so it was really fun and critical and kind of challenging to sort of work through them comprehensively together. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Emily. It was really a good presentation, really. Thank you. Thank you very much. I don't know if somebody in the audience would like to start with some questions or comments. If you don't want to speak or open your mic, you can use the chat. So, but if you don't, or while you think about it, I have two questions. I have some questions, two for Anna and one for you, Emily. As Anna was speaking, I was thinking, like you have you had a very important role as a director, but I was thinking, as a director, did you also have to struggle with all the same issues? Like if you were not, I mean, you as a director, you were in a position of power, but even though you still have to struggle with issues of gender. And my other question for you, Anna, is what would you say, what would you tell younger women that are starting to their path related to gender and feminism, etc. And Emily, I was thinking about what you mentioned about collaboration, which I think is very, very interesting. And I don't know if you could tell us or develop or give us an example, a successful example about something that through collaboration had changed or had gained a more feminist or gender perspective. So
sure,
I will leave it there. So thank you.
Emily, can I start?
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, go ahead.
Thank you. I will start with your second question. So what would I say to young female historians who are starting their careers? I would say you do not have to justify yourself. You do not have to assert yourself. you are as qualified as any other historian you work with. So don't waste your time on saying, but this is why I do it. No, just do it. And this is the mistake that I was trying to convey from my generation. We spent so much time and energy asserting ourselves that there was little left for other projects. So don't. Just do the projects that are important to you. And when it comes to the position, yes, definitely being an assistant curator, director gives one a very different power to define the work. I am in a wonderful position right now where my CEO and my VP are both female, very much supportive of women's perspective. They absolutely believe that this is something we need to do, that it's a silence in the collection. They are also very supportive of representing non-binary LGBTQ+ perspectives. So that makes my work much easier. I do, as Emily said, I wanted to be a mentor. I mean, I had two wonderful mentors in my career, and I am where I am because of them. So I am in a position where I can mentor younger staff. I can help them get the jobs that they want, experience that they want. So I find myself very often in a position when someone comes from a different department. To give you an example, someone who's answering the funds for the museum may have a degree, master's degree in history. If that person comes to me and says, you know, what do I need to do to be able to work as a historian? I'm in a position to help them, to create special projects, to create mentoring. So I very much try to use my position to empower women, not only women, because like I said, fortunately right now we are balanced. We have a balance, gender balance in the division. We do not have the, we have male-female balance. We do not have a gender bias balance in the division. So I am trying to attract non-binary staff members and LGBTQ+ perspectives to the division. It makes a huge difference in the way that we interpret artifacts, to actually have people with variety of different perspectives and life experiences.
Thank you, Anna.
So your question about collaboration, I think a really good example of this, and really quite straightforward, is in the Women in STEM exhibit that we recently completed at Ingenium. So this was 2018, 2019. It's called Iron Willed. It's a traveling exhibition, and it features, you know, women working in the field right now, up and coming women and girls in STEM, historically important women in the fields that we wanted to focus on. And we applied a really collaborative and transparent approach to content development. So we would reach out to scientists to see if they were interested in being featured in the exhibit. And if they agreed, we would craft text about them. And so we have our own text hierarchy and accessibility standards for our text. So there are certain limitations there in terms of how much we can say about, well, how many words we can use in each space. But then what we would do is flip that text to the scientists and ask them, you know, is this all right? Is this how you want to be described? And accept the changes that they suggested. I think that's pretty straightforward, but we also would include images. And so we asked the scientists directly to send us images of themselves, either in the lab, working, whatever image they wanted to go next to their name and their story, so that what's being presented there is, you know, factually correct, because that's important to the museum, but also the representation that these scientists wanted of themselves. So I think that that kind of collaboration, it builds trust with these women. It shows them that these kinds of stories are coming out of the museum, and it also presents a really sort of collaborative, reciprocal, iterative text and content production process. It does take a little bit more time, but I think that just like we were talking earlier about translations, you know, in multiple languages or designing more accessible content, these are things that can be built into the timelines of your projects. And the final product is something that not only the institution is really happy with because they know it's built these things, but it also makes for a more inclusive process for the people that are being showcased in the exhibits.
Thank you, Emily. I give the floor to the audience again, in case anybody wants to ask something or a comment or a reflection, even a critique. If you don't, I have another question for Anna. It's a similar question that I made to Emily. Anna, can you talk about a project during your career that you really think like as a breaking point for you, like very successful, like something that encouraged you to keep going? And for Emily, also, I have another question. Like, I know you're finishing your PhD, Emily, right now. So do you think like careers such as Anna's has opened paths for you that perhaps on your own you couldn't? I mean, like you already have like, yeah, like a way that has been open for you that made things easier, or you also have faced the same struggles? So, okay.
Maybe Emily, you go first this time.
Sure, yeah. So I think, as I mentioned, and then as Anna mentioned, I think mentorship is really important because the roles that we have at the moment are quite, there can be a lot of flexibility and a lot of sort of taking things in directions that maybe predecessors haven't done. So I think having a mentor that is open and encouraging and doesn't require the not justification, but what Anna was talking about the recognizing the importance of certain projects that haven't historically been part of research scopes or projects at the museum is really important. I mean, I think I could spend a lot of time just like kind of gushing about Anna and like how fantastic she has been as a mentor. No, it's really true. I mean, I have said to her, you know, the way Anna and I met was I didn't get screened in for an interview. And I went to her and was like, you know, I think when you're young, maybe your sense of self and ambition is like larger than your actual CV. And so I was wanting to know how I could do better and how to get into this work. And, you know, Anna gave me really good experiences there. I do, in my own sort of plans for my career, I do still feel like tension and uncertainty about the role of family and the role of the feasibility of maintaining the work that I do and building the career that I want. And that's coming from someone who doesn't have a family, but is thinking about starting one. And so that is a hesitation that I feel, even with, you know, women that I see doing that work right now. So I think that definitely having, you know, mentors that are encouraging and challenging, at the same time, having directors and fellow colleagues that do a lot of the work that I want to do. Anna mentioned that she's an instructor at Carleton, balancing that sort of academic teaching and curatorial work is something that a lot of us are increasingly interested in, because it puts us in, you know, it allows us to share our work at the museum and give opportunities to students, but also meet like incredible people that are doing really fascinating work that we wouldn't otherwise be exposed to or interact with necessarily. So I'm not sure if that answers your question, but I think there is certainly, I mean, people have called it like a sisterhood, but I think there is just this support you. I feel that I need these support systems in place to be able to, be challenged, but also, be pushed in the right directions. And when I do experience self-doubt, which is not all the time, but I think coming through and growing up in a society that, challenges why these voices, why is this important? Why does this matter? That does sort of weigh on you. And so you always come at things with like, okay, this needs to be ironclad and I super need to make my case, as Anna was talking about. And that does just sort of take away from the actual doing of the work. So bit of a rambling answer, but I think, supports are important, goals are important, colleagues are important. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily.
So it was an interesting question that you posed to me. And like I said, for so much of my career, I was working under the assumption that I have to do my work in the same way that my male colleagues do, or it's not as valuable. So I wasn't really thinking about gender. I wasn't thinking about participation of women. The project that changed this for me and really, I think, made the rest of my career much more rewarding was, sorry for a vulgarity here, the project literally was called "My Wife Said This Shit Has to Go," because that's the most common answer to my question to a male donor: why do you want to donate this to the museum? So, a man calls, says, I've got all these artifacts, do you want them? And I say, why would you want to donate them? The answer is always, my wife said this shit has to go. So that kind of got me thinking, okay, what's the relationship of women to the artifact collection? Is that true that the wife said this has to go? If it's so important, if these are historically significant artifacts. So I started to question this sentence and then started to do more research with women, ask questions, ask about their relationship to artifacts. Did lots of surveys on the museum floor. I actually had 2 young students from high school who had to do their volunteers hours. They were doing surveys, so many surveys with women visitors. We do know our audience. For many years, we had audience researchers employed by the museum. That position is vacant right now, but it's a very important position. So we knew that more women visit museums than men. We knew that they come with their families. We knew that they tell the stories to their children as they visit, yet they were not engaged with the artifact collection. So that definitely, that research project changed my approach completely. So it wasn't the feminist methodologies like Emily's saying. For her, I think it's more being exposed to those methodologies at university through her studies. For me, it was more the practice at the museum that led me to focus on gender.
Thank you, Anna. We have a question for Emily from Anna Janenko. I hope I'm saying that correctly. Emily, have you done statistical research on visiting feminist exhibitions and projects? Are female visitors the majority?
So yes and no, I would say to the first answer there. I haven't done sort of the quantitative analysis of exhibitions and feminist projects that are more feminist in tone in order to see what, but what we do as part of the museum practice is, as Anna, I think was mentioning, like we do testing at the front end and at the back end of exhibition development. So when we are thinking about an exhibit topic or concerned about the response to a display, we will reach out to our members and share content with them and see what their responses are. So I can give an example of this if that's helpful. Before we did the complete renewal of the Canada Science and Technology Museum, we did do testing to see what themes or what subject areas visitors wanted to see in the museum. So that's sort of like the higher level testing. And then I can't speak for all of the other exhibits, but in the exhibit I worked on, we decided to take a bit of a different presentation angle to one of the displays, and we wanted to see how that would read with our audiences. Primarily at the museum, we are an intergenerational family group, audience base. So you're going to have children with parent figures, with grandparents. And so there's a whole sort of swath of knowledge and insight and expectations there. So what we were sharing was, I mentioned a little bit earlier about the gender scripting of children's toys. And so we wanted to put a series of children's toys on display and look at how, with time, the gendering of these toys had changed. And for our museum, that was a bit different because historically we've really, when the toys are on display, it's sort of like how these things work and more of like the replica or smaller version of existing technologies. And we hadn't really played with gender and design. And so we were cautious that parents or parent figures might feel that this is something that is critical or questioning of their own parenting if they were purchasing these toys for their children. And so we shared the images, the text, the artifacts with our, I think it wasn't our membership, it was like a subgroup of our membership that had agreed to be part of the testing for exhibit content for the renewal. And so overwhelmingly, we heard positive feedback that this is something that would promote conversation within the household, that they thought science and tech museums should be exploring, that was important given, the craze of consumerism that has been part of probably all of our lives. And so while we didn't, I think actually we did break that down into sort of like categories of response through more of a ranking system. So it would be like more of like a stats-based response. It was really the comments and feedback that we heard that allowed us to feel confident and to pursue the exhibit and to not really make any changes because it was so well received. So I don't know if that answers your question entirely, but certainly knowing our audiences, doing, for the Women in STEM exhibit, before we decided to go ahead with that, we did an environmental scan, basically the lit review of exhibits to see what was out there and how we could contribute to the conversation rather than repeating it. So I think it is a balance between telling important stories and telling them in ways that will be engaged with our audiences. And so that's tricky. We don't always succeed, but it definitely is something that we are mindful to. We don't just sort of come at things because in a way that isn't informed.
Thank you, Emily. Both of your answers made me think about, I'm from Colombia, made me think about my own country, that the National Museum of Colombia is launching in a very few weeks the first exhibition about the LGBTQ+ community. And it's, I think it's very important, but it's also in such a traditional institution that I'm really looking forward to see how people respond to that, because it's kind of a very new thing, but I think it's important. I think those kinds of exhibitions have to be done. And I also have a question for both of you. Is there a project that you still want to do that haven't been able to do? Something that you are looking forward to still do that has been like something is meant for you to do?
There is a project. I'm not sure how much I can say about this project because it's quite sensitive. So the project that I really want to do in collaboration with the natural resources, current natural resources curator, and that theme is around mining, Canadian mining abroad, and the impacts and collaborations and problems and issues that involve local communities. But it is a very sensitive project that actually involves a court case, so I can't really go into details. But it's I think telling international stories of women, the stories are never, they are not narrow, they are not closed into one tiny little community. There are impacts that we don't even realize cross the borders, that you know, cultural impacts that are huge. So I think we need to start expanding our collaborations. I mean collaborations among historians. As a Canadian historian, there is only so much I can do in terms of Canadian mining when it's done abroad. I need a partner from another country that will share the values, that will be interested in similar stories and similar perspectives. And that's often difficult to do. Maybe the International Federation will change this.
Well, probably if this video gets, when it gets circulated, probably people can get in touch with you. I really hope so.
So for me, I think it would be well, I'll just speak about the project that I'm working on right now because I want that to eventually finish, which is my dissertation research. And that looks at questions of gender and accessibility in public transit systems, primarily the one in Ottawa, Ontario, Canada. And so I've taken sort of a long view looking at how public transit systems, like the actual network where they're set up, the material culture, the technologies themselves, how they've been designed, for whom, for what purpose, primarily to move able-bodied men to their sites of paid employment across the city. In Ottawa, that was mainly a lumber industry, lumber and logging, as well as the federal service, looking at when those spaces are challenged by different bodies. So in the 1940s and the Second World War, you're seeing more women than ever before using public transit because they are now part of the workforce. There's an automobile shortage and they need to use these systems to run errands. And so there's this incredible tension and animosity between traditional users and new users. And then how changes in legislation and activism in the 70s and 80s have transformed the accessibility of these systems. So in Ottawa, this started with a separate paratransit system that was sort of a test case. So specially designed vehicles to pick up users using mobility devices, primarily wheelchairs, in order to bring them to their medical appointment. So this is really a medical sort of analysis of disability, that, you know, people with disabilities only need to use public transit to get to their medical appointments, and seeing how adaptations were incorporated into conventional services. So think of low floor buses, kneeling buses, flip seats, those sorts of things. And what I'm finding in my research, or what I found in my research, is that while these spaces are now made accessible, and so women with strollers can get on buses much more easily than they could pre, 1970s, the gendering of these spaces is still incredibly fraught, and that these mothers primarily are not welcome in these spaces in the same way that new users like riders with mobility devices are. So it's a really interesting project that gets at so many different things. And yeah, I find it really interesting. And I know that it's not unique to Ottawa, where my case study is, but that's one of the projects that I'm working on right now. I look forward to finishing. And then in the future, I think it's really just, as I sort of said, like in any project, making sure that gender is a part of it. It doesn't have to be explicit to women. For example, I'm looking to document the sort of last 40 so years of Oshawa, which is an automotive industrial town in Southern Ontario. They had a GM Canada plant that was the largest in Canada. And from the 1980s until 2010 has slowly shrunk in upon itself as automotive skill and labor has been outsourced globally. And so within that, I want to talk about community, and within community, I want to learn about, daycares and community centers and sort of bringing gender in through the support systems in place and how those have changed for this auto town. So yeah, those are just two of the projects that I think are worth sharing today.
Thank you, Emily and Anna. Your presentations really give me like a sense of hope and encouragement, because as Anna's title says, the more exchange, it can also stay the same. Sometimes a woman in public history or in academia have to prove themselves twice to be respected just as men. And you see in many history departments in the United States that most professors are white men, and it's hard. So this kind of work, I think it's it's definitely very, very important. I would like to ask you like if you have any closing remarks, if you have anything you would like to say, any thoughts you want to share.
I think I'll go first. Just thank you again, Dr. Perry, for inviting us to be part of this conversation. I think my sort of closing remark would be that within feminist collecting and dealing with issues of representation, I think it can feel really daunting, but just the practice of starting and exploring topics, just beginning is really important. So I don't think, I was thinking about this, like, do you need to have sort of a laundry list of the things you want and a 5-year plan and, all of these things? And I feel like that in its own self can be overwhelming and prohibitive. So just asking different questions and starting to think about things differently in itself is a start, and that will get things moving in directions that it might not otherwise have happened. So don't be overwhelmed, just begin.
Thank you, Emily.
And I would echo what Emily said, ask questions that are important to you. Men, women, non-binary, ask questions that are important to you. And only that will progress our understanding of the society. Thank you very much, Dr. Perry, for organizing this session.
Well, thank you, Jimena. It's just fine. I don't know if anybody of the audience has a final comment or question. But if you don't, I want to thank you. I enjoyed this conversation really, really very much. I think it's very, very important. And I hope when I circulate the video, it will get like many, that they will contact you perhaps with questions and stuff. The explorers of the International Federation of Public History will be on a break during August. We'll be back in September, also with the director of the Texas Bureau of History, which director is also a woman. She's also going to talk about the feminist perspective here in the United States, which I think it's perfect to have your presentation and hers. And again, I thank you very much. I really, really like this presentation. I think it was just awesome. So thank you very much. And I hope that we can keep in touch and perhaps do some collaborations in the future.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.